So, I want to ask you a question directly, you listening. Have you ever been like cleaning out a closet or maybe looking at an old notebook and you just feel this sudden, almost vertigo-like sensation?
Oh, that drop in your stomach.
Exactly. Where you ask yourself, wait, do I have to end this? Really?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, in modern psychology and frankly, just in everyday conversation, the inability to let something go is almost always treated as like a pathology.
Right, like a failure to heal.
Yeah. If you feel this intense internal refusal to just, move on and close the chapter, society immediately tells you that you're stuck. We're constantly bombarded with this pressure to neatly package our past into a box, tape it shut, and just shove it into the attic of our minds so we can get to the next thing.
Because you're so busy, you have to keep moving.
Right. But what if your refusal to declare something finished isn't a flaw at all? What if it's actually a highly accurate biological and spiritual instinct?
Mhm.
Today, we are entirely dismantling the mythology of closure.
It's so needed because we have this fundamental misunderstanding of how human development actually works. We're routinely taught that growth demands sacrifice,
Hmm.
that the new phase of your life can only arrive if the old phase is, like, properly killed, buried, and grieved over. But the text we're using as our source today, it's called The Architecture of Continuity, Beyond the Myth of Closure. And it argues something totally different.
It's a brilliant piece of writing.
It really is. It argues that your internal vertigo, that feeling of not wanting to end things, is actually your soul recognizing that closure is often just an artificial construct.
And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We're going to look at the source material to figure out why we're so obsessed with endings, the actual psychological damage that obsession causes, and the radically different framework we can use instead to understand our transitions.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the mechanics of this cultural obsession. Because the author points out that this demand for closure, it's not like an absolute human truth.
No, not at all.
It's heavily cultural. They call it the mythology of necessary endings. And they note that Western thought, in particular, demands that the arc must resolve.
Well, it bleeds directly from our storytelling into our psychology, right?
Oh, totally.
Think about the narrative structures we're just, like, raised on from birth. The climax happens, the antagonist is defeated, the couple gets together, and the screen fades to black.
Right, roll credits.
Exactly. And we expect our lived reality to mirror that clean three-act structure. The text points out that we've built entire therapeutic and social frameworks around the premise that an experience hasn't been properly processed unless it ends visibly.
Like grief has sequential stages you're supposed to graduate from.
Yes, and letting go is treated like a ladder you climb. So if a habit or a relationship or even a past identity doesn't end with some sort of definitive, obvious ceremony, we just assume we've failed the assignment.
Okay, I have to push back on that Western framework for a second, though, because looking at this obsession with closure, it feels incredibly transactional to
Yeah.
me. Well, isn't this just a way to make us better consumers? Like, we are constantly being told to clear our internal browser history, empty the cache so we can pretend we're a brand new computer straight out of the box.
Oh, wow.
Because if I completely sever my past and declare my old self dead, then I'm just a blank slate, perfectly primed to go out and consume the next version of my identity.
What's fascinating here is how explicitly the source text actually validates that exact suspicion.
Wait, really? It talks about the consumer aspect.
Yes, the author literally argues that the mythology of necessary endings perfectly serves worldviews that require you to distrust your own history.
Wow.
It actively encourages you to begin again, totally emptied out, so you can be what the author calls a good consumer of new identities.
A good consumer of new identities.
Yeah.
That is.
It's chilling, honestly. It's essentially a cosmology of disposability, but applied to the human soul.
Yeah.
I mean, if your past selves are disposable, your current self is always going to be hungry for a new acquisition.
Which is just exhausting. You're constantly managing the PR of your own existence.
Exactly. And to counter this, the text introduces this concept borrowed directly from the physical sciences, which is phase changes.
Right.
The author asks us to look closely at the natural world because nature operates entirely without this, artificial concept of closure. Like, water doesn't end when it boils and becomes steam.
Right. The heat just adds kinetic energy. It breaks the molecular bonds and changes the state of matter.
Exactly. Or think about the caterpillar. It doesn't end when it turns into imaginal cells inside the chrysalis. It's biologically rearranged, sure, but the essence, the core material, hasn't died.
Yeah, we look at, a puddle drying up on the sidewalk,
Yeah.
and our immediate thought is, oh, the water is gone. It's dead.
Right.
But it's not. It's just in the air. It's doing something else. It's participating in the ecosystem in a completely different format.
The substance remains, even if the form becomes completely unrecognizable to the naked eye. So if we map that physical reality onto our psychological reality, the text asks this profound question. What if the major elements of your life do not end?
Mhm.
What if they just submerge or transform or integrate, hibernate, migrate?
But, okay, if things don't simply end in the way we've been conditioned to believe, what framework are we supposed to use?
Mm.
Because, I mean, transitions do happen. We change jobs, people leave our lives, we abandon old beliefs. How do we categorize those massive shifts, if not as endings?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text points toward what it calls the continuity principle.
The continuity principle.
Right, it's an ancient framework. You find it in a lot of indigenous, matrilineal, and goddess-centered traditions. In these cosmologies, nothing truly terminates. Everything is just part of an ongoing cycle of transformation.
And the text gives some incredibly vivid examples of this. Like, it mentions the transition from the Meiji to the crone.
Yes, that's a beautiful one.
Because in modern terms, we often view aging as, like, the slow death of youth. But under this continuity principle, the older, wise woman isn't the death of the young girl. She is the deepest completion of her.
That's it, exactly. And the agricultural metaphor the author uses is also super vital here. Think of the fallow season in farming.
Right, when the field is just left bare.
Yeah, unplanted.
Yeah.
And to a purely capitalist or like extraction-based mindset, that field looks dead. It looks useless.
It's not producing anything, so it must be over.
But the fallow period doesn't end the field. The inactivity is actually an active biological process of restoring the nitrogen and the nutrients so the soil can sustain the next crop. Or even think about ancestors. An ancestor doesn't end at death. They become a different kind of atmospheric presence in the lives of their descendants.
Okay, you used a term earlier from the text, though, in ontological architecture,
Oh, right.
which is a very heavy academic phrase.
Yeah.
Let's translate that for you listening. Are we basically talking about the fundamental blueprint of how we perceive reality?
Yes. Ontology is just the study of being. It's the study of what actually exists. So an ontological architecture is just the structural design of your reality. And the author emphasizes that embracing continuity, it's not about being in denial.
Right. You aren't plugging your ears and pretending you didn't get fired or that a terrible breakup didn't happen.
Exactly. Changing your ontological architecture means shifting the fundamental question you ask yourself when you are in pain or in transition. Instead of demanding, when do I finally end this? The continuity principle trains you to ask, what is this becoming?
What is this becoming? Okay, apply that directly to something in your life right now. Let's say you have a stalled project at work or a hobby you used to pour hours into, but you haven't touched it in 2 years.
Oh, everybody has one of those.
Right. Maybe there is a guitar sitting in the corner of your bedroom just gathering dust. The mythology of closure dictates that you should feel guilty every single time you look at it. It tells you to declare the hobby dead, sell the guitar, and definitively state, I'm not a musician.
Yes, just end it so you don't have to feel the guilt.
But under the continuity principle, that musical identity isn't dead, it's composting. It is quietly breaking down and gathering nutrients to feed whatever form your creativity takes next.
It's such a relief, isn't it? But it demands precision from us. Because the text argues that this reframe forces you to look really carefully at the actual mechanics of your experience rather than just lazily slapping a familiar, socially approved narrative of loss or failure onto a process that might actually be doing something highly productive in the dark.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if this phase change is our biological and spiritual baseline, fighting it must take a severe toll. What happens when we force an ending just to satisfy that cultural demand for closure?
Well, the text calls the cost of that forced closure a form of psychic violence.
Man, that is a brutal phrase. Psychic violence.
It is brutal, and the author uses it to describe the psychological damage that happens when you are coerced into ending something before you're ready, or, before the thing itself has finished running its course.
When we artificially terminate an experience, whether that's through sheer willpower or maybe a type of therapy that focuses way too heavily on just moving on, we sever a natural process.
And the author notes that these premature endings create ghosts.
Yes,
You get this deep, unsettling sensation of unfinished business lodged in your nervous system. Like you keep having the dream about the ex, or you keep obsessing over the job you quit. And society tells you that sensation means you failed at letting go. You didn't do the closure ritual correctly, or you're just too attached.
which is an incredibly unfair burden to place on someone.
But let me play devil's advocate for you listening, because I know the immediate counter-argument people will have.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't there a real, tangible danger in just holding on to things forever? Like, if someone is in a toxic relationship or stuck in a worldview that is actively harming them, isn't that just a failure to move on? Doesn't the continuity principle just hand us like a blank check to stay comfortably stuck? It's a really crucial distinction to make, and the text addresses it beautifully. The author argues that much of what we dismissively label an inability to move on is actually your soul's completely accurate perception that the situation is genuinely unresolved.
Oh, interesting.
It's not because you are fundamentally broken or inherently clingy. It's because the ending was imposed externally rather than arising naturally from within the cycle of the experience. When closure is forced prematurely or wrapped up too neatly just to, like, alleviate anxiety, it isn't true closure. The text uses a striking phrase for this. It calls it suppression wearing closure's clothing.
Suppression wearing closure's clothing. So you shove the complicated, messy feelings into a mental filing cabinet, slap a label on it that says closed chapter, and then spend years wondering why the cabinet keeps rattling.
Exactly. Biologically speaking, when you suppress a psychological process, the brain's Zeigarnik effect, which is our tendency to remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones, it goes into overdrive.
Wow, okay.
That's how suppression creates ghosts. The real question the text poses isn't whether you have amended something. The real question is this complete? Because an ending and a completion are two entirely different mechanisms.
The musical analogy the author uses here perfectly illustrates that difference, I think. Because a piece of music is complete when it has fully expressed the thematic material it set out to explore. Usually, that means resolving back to the root chord, which sounds very satisfying and final.
Right, the typical resolution.
But sometimes, a piece of music resolves on an open chord.
Yeah, think of a symphony that ends on a suspended, echoing note that intentionally refuses to resolve back to the home key. Technically, the song ends, the conductor lowers the baton, the musicians stop playing.
But it doesn't close.
No! The tension remains in the room. As the text describes it, they leave the air changed.
You can have an experience in your life that ends like the relationship technically terminates, you sign the divorce papers, you move to a new city, the company goes bankrupt, but the experience rings out on an open chord. The air of your life is fundamentally changed. You don't have to force a neat, resolved chord onto the end of the narrative if the song of that experience simply wasn't written that way.
Translating this theoretical framework into daily practice, the text systematically walks through what this continuity looks like in our lives. It highlights 4 specific areas that do not actually have to end.
Well, let's go through these.
Yeah. The first is love.
We cause ourselves an immense amount of suffering trying to actively kill our love for someone just because the structural relationship didn't work out.
We really do.
And the text argues that love does not have to end in order to change form. If a passionate romantic love transforms into a platonic friendship, or even just into, like, a deep, silent sense of gratitude from afar, what the author beautifully terms the quiet background hum of a life well shared, that love didn't die. It graduated.
It graduated because the neural pathways you built around loving that person, they don't just vanish, they repurpose themselves. Allowing love to graduate removes the bitterness from the transition. It stops you from viewing the end of a relationship format as the failure of the emotion itself.
Which naturally flows into the second area, right? How we view our past selves, our identity. Because you often have to leave an old version of yourself behind when a relationship graduates.
Right. And the text explicitly states that an identity doesn't have to end for you to expand. The version of you who was, tentative, awkward, and searching, she didn't die when you finally arrived at certainty and confidence.
She integrated.
Exactly. That searching, unsure past self is quite literally inside your current certainty. She is informing it, keeping it humble, and keeping it honest.
So you don't have to look back at your awkward teenage self or the lost 20-something version of you who made terrible decisions and wish they were dead or erased from your history.
No, please don't.
They are the structural scaffolding of the person you are right now. You can't remove the foundation without collapsing the building.
And speaking of that scaffolding, this applies directly to how we produce things. The third practical area the text explores is creative projects. A creative pursuit does not have to end in order to rest.
I see this constantly with people who build things or make art. They abandon a hobby and immediately label themselves a failure.
Right.
But the text frames this entirely differently. Projects can go underground.
Hmm.
They become dormant so they can gather resources in the dark. Maybe your subconscious is still working out the narrative of the novel you abandoned, or your technical skills just need a few years to catch up to the ambition of your original vision.
And the source material offers a really direct warning here. Projects that are prematurely killed, the ones you aggressively close out, archive, and explicitly declare finished just to alleviate the anxiety of having them on your plate.
The ghosts again.
Yes, those are the ones that spend years haunting the creator. But the projects you simply allow to rest, they tend to return when the season is right. It's the precise difference between burying something alive and planting a seed.
And if we apply that same grace to our internal lives, we arrive at the fourth area, spiritual and personal practice.
Right. When a spiritual practice stops being formal, say you stop attending a specific place of worship or you stop meditating for exactly 20 minutes on a cushion every single morning, society assumes the practice has ended.
You quit.
But the text suggests that the practices that truly impacted you don't end. They become part of your nervous system.
Because neuroplasticity proves this, right? If you spend years practicing mindfulness, it literally changes your baseline respiration and your amygdala response.
Yes.
So when you stop the formal practice, it hasn't ended. It has just become the way you naturally breathe and interact with stress. The practice didn't die. It became you.
This raises an important question, though, because if we accept that this internal continuity is our natural state, that love graduates, identities integrate, projects gather resources, and practices become our nervous system, it raises a pretty glaring question about our modern behavior.
Which is,
Why are we constantly putting on a public show of closure? Why is our culture, and specifically our social media, flooded with grand declarations about closing chapters, leaving toxicity in the past, and moving on?
the performance of endings.
Yeah.
The author goes right after this phenomenon. There is this enormous social pressure to perform endings legibly, like we are expected to post the closure, announce the new chapter, publicly burn the old letters, and construct a narrative that makes perfect sense to an outside observer.
Now, the text is careful to acknowledge that ceremony and ritual are genuinely useful tools for the individual.
Right. Sometimes you need a physical action to signal to your own brain that a phase change has occurred.
Exactly. But the performance of endings for the benefit of an audience, that is a trap. We perform closure so other people can witness our growth, confirm our healing, and approve our movement. We want society to, stamp our passport so we can travel to the next phase of our lives without being judged or questioned.
And this brings us to the core empowerment of the text,
Yeah.
the concept of sovereignty. You do not owe anyone a legible ending.
Oh, I love that.
You do not have to definitively declare a thing finished just so your friends, your family, or your internet following can easily categorize your relationship to it. The transformation can be totally internal, quiet, and ongoing.
The author writes that asking the question, do I have to end anything, really, is not an act of psychological avoidance. It is an act of sovereignty. It is a flat refusal to be managed by someone else's grief structure.
Refusing to be managed by someone else's grief structure, that is profound. If you are someone who naturally holds contradictions, who doesn't always know if a phase of your life is truly over, the text argues that your uncertainty isn't a failure. It is simply fidelity to the actual texture of your experience. Life is relentlessly messy. It isn't a tightly scripted television show with a neat narrative arc.
Right. You have to trust that you will know when something is complete. And you will know it not because you threw a moving away party or because you posted a 5-paragraph breakup essay, but because you physically feel the natural, quiet exhale of a thing that has finally finished expressing itself through you.
Yeah.
You don't have to use a cosmology of closure that wasn't designed for your soul.
So what does this all mean? When you pull all these threads together, what does this actually mean for how we live? I think it means you are released from the schedule.
Yep.
You don't have to aggressively perform closure to earn your right to exist in your next chapter. Your mind and your body inherently know the profound difference between anxiously holding on out of fear and lovingly holding close out of continuity.
You do not have to separate what can be integrated. You don't have to violently bury what can be gently composted. As the author states in the powerful closing thesis of this text, Nothing real is ever fully over. It just changes address.
It just changes address. And that leaves me with one final thought I want to offer you. Something to carry with you today as you go back to your life. If it's true that nothing real is ever over, if our past loves, our dormant creative projects, and our former awkward searching identities never truly end but simply change address within us, what does that mean for how we greet our new beginnings?
Mm.
Perhaps we aren't constantly running out of space. Perhaps we aren't required to demolish our past selves to make room for the new ones to move in. What if, instead, you were building a massive, infinite internal house? A sprawling, impossible architecture where every single version of yourself, every graduated love, every resting project, and every open chord finally gets to live together under one roof. So as you go about the rest of your day, take a look around inside. What does your house look like right now?